We head on down to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and talk to Wyoming Liberty Group, where Maureen Bader is waiting breathlessly by as the snow melts in her yard. What's the temperature down there, Maureen?
Geez, it's got to be warm. It must be over 40 degrees.
Wow.
I was practically breaking out a sweat on my walk home from lunch.
See, now I was visiting my sister in Florida during Christmas, and I was trying to explain to her, when we are in the negative numbers and then it warms up to like 35, 40 degrees, we take our sweaters off, we take our coats off, we take our gloves and hats off. Feels great to us. She didn't understand. She wasn't getting it.
It's all relative, you know.
I guess it is, with relatives especially. Okay, so we have the governor of Wyoming with the state address, and I was getting a good laugh listening or reading the Democrat response to that, and I thought, you know, Maureen, when our governor and the Democrats agree on stuff, I'm kind of nervous.
Yeah, it's seriously bad news because, of course, you remember back in December 2014, the governor presented his supplemental budget, and in there he said, basically, the state is facing a $4.4 million general fund budget deficit, and but you know what? That doesn't tell the whole story. He said, well, you know, there's more than enough money in various reserves, including the rainy day fund, budget reserve account, Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund, strategic investment projects account, to pay for his spending priorities. But what he did at the time was leave that up to the legislature to define where that money was going to come from. And in fact, he basically, through the discussion, implied that what they should do is make a rainy day fund raid. And the interesting thing about that was, of course, that was then, but this is now. During the State of the State speech, the main difference really was not that there still was going to be a deficit. In fact, he actually admitted that there probably was going to be even less revenue in the January consensus revenue estimating group than in the October group report than in the October consensus revenue estimating group report. That's the Craig report that we hear about all the time. So he said it's not that there's probably going to be more money, and he didn't back down from his spending wish list, but what he did do was back away from his implication that what the legislature should do to pay for all of this was raid the rainy day fund. And I think the reason for that was because there was an extreme lack of enthusiasm shown by the Joint Appropriations Committee during the agency budget presentations back in December. You know, if you can look at the Wyoming Department of Transportation, for instance, it got a huge amount of pushback from the Joint Appropriations Committee meeting when it came up with this $21.2 million to pay for passing lanes on Highway 59. That's between Douglas and Gillette. I'm sure you've probably driven on it yourself. As we discussed, you know, before, there's a big increase in the amount of traffic there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that passing lanes are going to be the answer. And in fact, the Joint Appropriations Committee said, you know, not we're going to raid the rainy day fund to pay for this. They said basically, we want you to use some of the $47 million that you got in fuel tax revenue from the gas tax grab that happened last year. We want you to use that to pay for these passing lanes, if in fact you think that that's such an emergency that they need to be built in the next couple of years.
Well, wasn't that what the gas tax was supposed to be for? Things just like that?
Well, in fact, yes. The fuel tax increase was supposed to be this long-term source of funding. It was actually called the Highway Funding Bill. It wasn't called the gas tax grab bill. Of course, it's all about marketing, even for legislators. But and there was a clause in that bill originally that said that $47 million could only be used for highway maintenance. But of course, new lane construction is not highway maintenance. It actually is going to create more highway maintenance in the future. That clause was null and void as just a few months ago. So I mean, essentially, they can use that fuel tax grab amount, the $47 million, for anything, including passing lanes on Highway 59. And they really pushed back on that quite a bit. They said, well, you know, we already have that money for other priorities. Well, you know, if these other priorities are so important, then I guess maybe Highway 59 lanes aren't that important, and we don't really need to build them. I mean, the amount of pushback they got during that meeting was actually I was actually very impressed, and I think that's probably one of the reasons, in addition to the fact that the governor totally muddied the water about why they needed to build those highway passing lanes in that particular speech. I think that's part of the reason why the governor has come back and said with two alternatives for where that money should come from, and not from the rainy day fund.
Well, this is something that you and I talked to our, from local legislators, I mean, from even city councils all the way up to the state level. We've been saying for a good long time now that, all of this money we've been awash in is not necessarily guaranteed. So when fuel prices suddenly plummet, good for the nation, because that means there's going to be more of an economy on the road right now, which is nothing but good for the nation. But bad for the state of Wyoming from the city level on up to the state level. So all of a sudden, I wonder, is the governor's budget suddenly all out the window here? Or you said his wish list is still pretty much the same. How is that possible?
Yeah, the wish list has basically not changed. Essentially, there's a great big spending wish list that includes quite a bit of the usual, which I like to call pork. Mm-hmm. That's the whole business about pork barrel spending. How do we bring money into our constituencies so that we can actually get reelected the next time? And so the University of Wyoming, I mean, this has been one of the biggest recipients of pork for the past probably 10 years or so, and it continues to be the top recipient of pork in the governor's current budget, which he has not backed down on at all. He wants, for instance, an additional $1 million in higher salaries. Now, supposedly this supplemental budget request is for investments in the future. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, it means higher salaries for existing University of Wyoming employees. And this is after a $12 million salary increase in the last budget, not to mention the recently approved 5% tuition increase and an extra $91 in annual student fees to pay for higher salaries. So now this not only means a higher ongoing salary tab at the university, because remember, the governor is going on and on about how this is one-time spending to make sure that we're set up for bigger growth in the future. That this is not one-time spending. This is an ongoing higher salary tab, not to mention higher pension contributions this year and every year in the future. What we see here is not a one-time investment in infrastructure, but in fact a very good example of political investments on the part of the governor.
Yeah, I don't want to really bring you off topic on this here, so I hope I'm not. But okay, you mentioned pension. Well, that was something that was a bit of a problem before. Well, if we end up with less revenue because there's a bit of a gasoline glut going on right now, and the EPA is still after the coal industry, the Republicans got to get to work on shutting that down, then what happens with the pension fund?
Well, that's right, because what happened back in 2008, 2009, of course, was the big drop-off in investment returns in the pension. There was actually a 30% reduction in the value of the pension fund. And at the time, what that meant was some fixing around the edges for new employees, but no fundamental reform in the system. So even though they're looking at perhaps the pension fund being 100% funded 20 years from now, that's given a 7.5% or 7.75% return on their investment fund every year between now, on average anyway. Actually, no, not on average. More, it would have to be at least a 7.75% increase, a return on the pension fund over the next 20 years for it to be 100% funded. But how likely is that? I mean, well,
it's hard to do that when the economy's good.
I mean, you don't do it when if you've got a pension fund, if you have a fund that's making 7.75%, please let me know what it is. I'm going to invest my money there. Right?
Yeah.
Because you just don't make that anymore.
Really? Usually only people who are that politically connected do that, and they usually wind up in jail for it sometime later. Okay, so what, he went through his State of the State address, was there any particular item that jumped out at you that why is he asking for that?
Well, one of the things that he keeps on going on and on about is yet bigger subsidies for local government. Local government's already got, I think it was an extra $125 million over and above what they normally get in state funding in the 2015-16 budget, which passed just back a year ago. And for some reason, the governor wants to give them an additional $25 million just in fund money, plus $6.4 million for municipal waste project, and another $2.6 million to correct a 1995 accounting error. I mean, all we're doing here is stimulating local government overspending. And the real issue with state money to local governments is that it creates serious accountability problems. I mean, governments are most accountable when they spend the money that they've been voted into office to spend. If they're actually able to spend money raised from taxes from other people who aren't able to vote or not vote for them, they can't be punished for irresponsible spending. So one of the things we could be, I mean, one of the reasons we could be seeing more spending in local governments on non-core services like convention centers and ice rinks and golf courses and swimming pools is because they're not actually being held accountable for the spending that they made.
Yeah, see, my last article for the Campbell County Observer, I talked about just that. I've been saying all along here in Gillette, Wyoming, to city officials, you're spending literally hundreds of millions of dollars, and once the project is built, it's millions every single year to maintain the project. And they kept talking to me about the big boom that we're going through. Well, outside of a boom, after the boom is over, there always comes a bust. Now he's still got these bills to take care of. And I even wonder about things like the governor. Did he mention anything about high-speed internet or getting better internet across Wyoming? Because I know that was one of his topics.
Well, he sort of split his talk into two parts. One was the past 4 years, and the other is in the future. And he figures that all the money that they've been spending on broadband has basically created returns because we've got all these data centers coming into the state. Of course, the data centers are getting huge tax breaks to come into the state. They're not coming because, well, I mean, probably the main reason they come to Wyoming is because we've got lower electricity costs for now. But the other big reason, of course, is they get big handouts from government. And then to say, oh, it's because we've been already spending huge amounts of money to create lower costs for these industries to come. It's just like subsidy after subsidy after subsidy, and the state does not do well if, in fact, you're not investing in real capital with real wealth. You're just creating subsidy programs and corporate welfare programs for these welfare bums that come here and use the handouts the government gives them to set up here.
Well, I'm glad you put it that way, because a lot of times when I say welfare bums, I quite literally mean the guy who came here just to get welfare and live in some ratty little trailer somewhere. But a lot of people don't see the welfare bums as being the big business who are taking advantage of the exact same thing, just on a much bigger scale.
Just on a much bigger scale, that's right.
All right, we have to take a look at also Medicaid expansions. So let's say Wyoming goes ahead and expands Medicaid like so many states. And then, of course, the federal government that doesn't have the money to back up their end of the bargain starts reneging, cutting back. And so the state of Wyoming decides this isn't working. We cancel the expansion program. Well, under the Obamacare rules, that means the federal government is going to take all Medicaid out of the state.
Yeah, I don't actually know that much about Medicaid to delve into all these weeds, but I've heard that as well, that there is no out switch.
Right.
Once you're in, and everybody's in Medicaid just like normal. And that's, I mean, it's a very, very risky thing to expand Medicaid for a lot of reasons. And, here we have the governor in his budget promoting this one-time spending myth. Well, there's also this myth about why the state should expand Medicaid. And there's just a lot of problems with it. But if you think about it this way, Medicaid expansion is really nothing more than a form of Obamacare expansion with all the same kind of problems, because you're expanding a big government program that doesn't work very well, as we've already all seen. Now, Medicaid expansion is bad for a lot of reasons. I mean, the fact that the Democrats actually agree with the meat on this is just
really disturbing to me. Yeah.
But unfortunately, what the governor is doing, he gave sort of a list of the reasons why we should expand Medicaid, and what he's really doing is supporting a mythology around Medicaid expansion by outlining facts that play out this surface positive without explaining all the negatives that are hidden behind the scenes, or what are really the downsides. He plays up the upsides. I mean, it's typical politician. Then play up the upsides and don't even mention the downsides. Now, one of the governor's claims, he said in his speech yesterday, was that the Medicaid expansion would create 800 jobs. Now, on the surface, that sounds great. But what he's really saying is that if you promised people a free service, they're going to demand more of it, and you're going to need more people to provide that free service.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a no-brainer. But according to the health department analysis, of those 800 jobs, about 500 of them will be in the healthcare industry. But the healthcare industry already has a lot of job vacancies that are going unfilled. What we will end up with, if you've got a huge increase in demand and no increase in supply, is healthcare rationing.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we got going on here? We've got Obamacare and Medicaid expansion plans. They go on and on in a utopian way about how people would get the medical attention they need if only they had health insurance. The underlying assumption here is that health insurance and health care are the same thing. Is that true? Does having health insurance mean that you're going to get the care you need? Well, if you need to only take a look at Medicaid itself to see the answer to that question. In 2010, about 42 million children from low-income families obtained health insurance under two programs, Medicaid and CHIP. CHIP is called the Children's Health Insurance Program. In a study done by the General Accountability Office in 2011, it showed that fewer doctors and specialists accept children insured by Medicaid and CHIP as new patients than they do by those covered by private insurance. So just how bad is it? Well, about 75% of primary care doctors and specialists throughout the U.S. are enrolled as Medicaid and CHIP providers. About 77% of those doctors accept all children covered by private insurers as new patients, but only 45% accept all children covered under Medicaid and CHIP. And it's even worse with specialists. About 84% of specialists accept all children covered by private health insurance as new patients, compared to only 51% who accept all children insured by Medicaid and CHIP. Now, most rural primary care doctors accept Medicaid and CHIP insured children as new patients. I mean, more in rural areas than in urban areas will do that. And Wyoming is primarily urban. So what does that mean for Wyoming? Does that mean that Wyoming doctors are more willing to take on new Medicaid patients? Well, according to Wyoming's Medicaid office, virtually all primary care physicians in Wyoming are enrolled to accept Medicaid patients. Wyoming Medicaid does not have the data on doctors who refuse to accept Medicaid patients, but they're not getting any patient complaints about doctors not accepting them because of Medicaid. Medicaid patients in general seem to have the same access to doctors as everyone else in the state. The problem, though, is that we don't have enough health care providers. I got that right from the Medicaid office. So as Medicaid expands, it will continue to be a problem. I mean, the access to doctors here in the state, especially in more rural areas than either Gillette or Cheyenne, for instance, it's going to continue to be a problem because we just don't have enough doctors and nurses in the state now.
Well, so real quick, one of the things I worry about, I sent you an article, and I know you've been busy, so you may not have had time to look at it, but it was an article that showed that hospitals around the country, especially in small rural towns, are shutting down because of Medicaid expansion, and doctors are bailing out of the system because they can't afford it.
Yeah, I mean, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal today by this doctor who said what he's done is set up a clinic, basically, that doesn't take Medicaid or Medicaid, doesn't take insurance of any kind at all. It's cash only.
Right.
So if you've got the cash, and he says because he doesn't take any insurance at all, not just Medicaid and Medicare, he is able to offer services at a much reduced price because you don't have all this insurance fiddling around that you have to do. And that's, I think, you talk to doctors and they'll say, I'm either going to retire because I don't want to have to deal with this government insurance, or they're moving to these alternative delivery systems. So I think that's what we're going to be seeing more.
Well,
access to health insurance
up in Casper for that very reason. We're running out of time, Maureen. Where do they go to find out more about this? Because you have a lot to say about it.
That's right. Just go to our website, wyliberty.org, to find out more about this and more.
Thanks for coming on, Maureen.
Always great to be here. Bye now.